I think it's working. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacques Villemot, and I'm a Marine Policy Officer for the RSPB, here to talk to you today about marine protection in the UK and whether there is enough of it. First of all, huge thank you for having me. Big thanks to Rob and to the organization for inviting me for the. Okay, so I work at the UK level, and so what I saw what might be useful is to do a bit of a personal reflection really throughout this presentation of what happened in marine conservation in the past year, but also the shortcoming of the overall approach to site management we have in the UK. And being a bit biased here, but we'll be looking at SEBA specifically to illustrate that. And then looking overall at well, the shortcoming of the top-down approach to conservation, and to sort of not considering enough local communities in the decision-making process associated with marine protection. Okay, so let's jump into what happened in the past 12 months since I was last speaking to you past July. Quite a lot has happened. Been a busy year for in the marine sphere. And well, let's start with, I guess, the things that underpins all activities and development and conservation at sea, which is marine spatial planning. So, as you may be aware of, our government has committed to very significant targets for offshore wind deployment, 50 gigawatt by 2030, which is great. It's a needed target to reach net zero and tackle the climate crisis. However, it's obviously the largest development, the largest industrializations of our seas that we'll have ever known. And so we need a framework in place to make sure it doesn't happen to the detriment of nature. We can't fix the climate crisis by aggravating the biodiversity one. And so to tackle this, government has been launching a marine spatial prioritization program with the goal of reviewing the marine spatial plans, the plans in place to organize activities and development at seas and make sure nature has enough space to thrive and recover, and make sure that they would be up to the challenge. So it's been a slow process, a bit slower than we would have liked, but it's been a really helpful one to bring all the stakeholders in the room, have people from industry, people from the fishing industry, from the offshore wind industry, from other industry, but also government, ENGOs, and everyone just to talk a bit about how to reform those marine plans. Another thing that's happened in December last year, we've had the marine target as part of the Environment Act that was adopted, and which commits government to have our marine protected areas in favourable conditions by 2042. This one is a little bit of it's a bit underwhelming, frankly. Doesn't show great ambition. It's basically doing what government should be doing in marine protected areas anyway, and just keep business as usual, and that would take us to that 2042 deadline. So not showing great level of ambition, and definitely not raising the ambition to the level we would have liked to see here. Another thing has been probably the most talked about development in the marine protection policy sphere has been the adoption of highly protected marine areas in Okay, now let's dive into marine protected areas and protection in practice, and looking specifically at seabirds to illustrate some of the shortcomings of the current approach. So just a bit of scene setting. Government has committed to protect 30% of our seas by 2030. And in theory, it's the target that would have been reached according to government, because in theory 38% of our seas are designated as protected areas. However, and I'm sure many of you in the room will already be well familiar with this, in practice we are actually very far from this number. Most of these sites are unfortunately hardly more than lines on maps, and without appropriate management, monitoring, enforcement, they aren't delivering anything for nature, and only a fraction of those sites will actually be considered as considering as protected areas in reality. And that's no different for seabirds. So we know that there are some key omissions in the network of protected areas for seabirds. There is some key areas for food that are missing. So there's very little protection of the food source. In fact, most of the protected areas almost exclusively focus on breeding sites. And for exception, there's a few exceptions for terns, or in Scotland, for example, that designate protected sites for foraging, but that's really a small exception and very far from being the rule. And so in practice, you have those protected sites on land or on islands to protect seabirds breeding, but they become hardly more than safe places to starve in practice, because there isn't any protection of seabirds' food sources. There's also some key sites omitted, so sites such as Lundy Island, for example, in the Bristol Channel, that we know are hugely significant for our seabirds. In Lundy, there's over 20,000 seabirds now on the site, and it's really significant for populations of birds such as Manx shearwaters, for example. Over 90% of English Manx shearwaters are breeding on this island, but they aren't protected to the level of protection they need. And there's also species lacking in this assemblage. I mean, basically the network isn't there. However, government have never conducted a review to assess the sufficiency of the network for seabirds, and as such, it's just refusing to address those gaps because it doesn't have the data available to do so. Further, important as well to talk about the monitoring of these sites. And so you have here special protection areas, or the sort of gold sites for seabird protection at the minute in the UK. And they are sites specifically for seabird protection. And in England, there is 440 features that are protected under SPA, so marine birds under SPA. So one SPA can have many different birds protected under each, hence the very large number. However, of those 440 different bird population protected, 439 have never been assessed, so we just don't know in what condition they are within these sites, and as such we just can't take appropriate management measures to address whether they are declining, whether they are in unfavorable condition, or whether they're in good condition. We just don't know. If you look beyond just SPAs and look at other type of sites that protect birds, even if it's not with the same level of protection, so typically sites of specific scientific interest, SSSIs, then if you include them in the mix, the number goes up a little bit in terms of monitoring, but there we know that 19% of protected birds only are in good condition. So it just goes to show that there's a really long road to take, still to make sure that sites and protected areas actually drive recovery of nature. Okay, and now how do we improve this situation? Well, there is a bit of an issue currently, I believe, in how government is approaching some of that conservation and some of that management of protection sites in the UK, and that's been really clearly illustrated, in my opinion, by the highly protected marine area process that took place in England and in Scotland this past year. For me, I really strongly believe that successful conservation starts with community engagement. It's not something that we can bring along later down in the journey, because it's too late. And if you don't start with engaged with communities, take them along on that journey and explain why protection is important, why it's so desperately needed, and why it will benefit the community in the long run. I don't think we can't achieve that, and that's been very clearly proven by the process of highly protected marine areas in England and in Scotland this year. We'll have sites in England, typically like Lindisfarne, or in Scotland, where the issue has been hugely polarized and politicized. And now that means that they have come back on their commitment to designate 10% of their seas as highly protected by 2026. So really show that if you don't, ahead of starting to designate, start to talk with communities, then you can't reach those agreements. And we know that we desperately need to have those highly protected marine areas. It's not something that we can pick and choose. We need to have them in place. Okay, I think I'm slightly over time, even though I have no excuse because I have a very clear timer on the top of my screen. So very sorry about that, Rob. But yeah, please get in touch if you have any question on this. Really, really happy to discuss any of these